Okay, today Donald Trump did something he has previously decried as corrupt and cheating. Today, Donald Trump voted early in Florida's non-presidential Republican primary. Now, there is a mountain of irony in Trump voting early after having spent years fear-mongering about early voting. But it was actually what Trump said right after he voted that was the most concerning.
You said Harris's crowd sizes were AI and that there weren't people there. There's all kinds of video evidence and people who were there who have proven that false. Can you tell us about why you made that claim?
Well, I can't say what was there, who was there. I can only tell you about ours. We have the biggest crowds ever in the history of politics.
Trump is telling his believers, his followers, not to believe their lying eyes. Again. Now, Trump's claim here is that crowds at Vice President Harris's rally last week in Detroit were actually fake. There are countless photos and videos from media organizations proving that claim to be false and demonstrably so. There are also thousands of people, real human people, who showed up to that rally who can attest that the crowd was real because they are real. But even when confronted with the facts, Trump won't back down. And that is because this isn't just about crowd sizes. Yesterday, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders issued a very serious statement about what he sees as the real issue here. Donald Trump may be crazy, but he's not stupid. When he claims that nobody showed up at a 10,000-person Harris Walz rally in Michigan that was live streamed and widely covered by the media, that it was all AI and that Democrats cheat all the time, there is a method to his madness. Clearly and dangerously, what Trump is doing is laying the groundwork for rejecting the election results if he loses. If you look at the language in Trump's original post pushing this AI conspiracy, it is clear that Senator Sanders is right. Not only does Trump accuse Harris of cheating by supposedly posting AI-generated images, he claims that this is the way the Democrats win elections, by cheating, and they're even worse at the ballot box. Trump says that Harris should be disqualified because the creation of a fake image is election interference, and that anyone who does that will cheat at anything. You don't even have to read between the lines here. Trump is clearly laying the groundwork to call the election rigged, and he's doing it right in front of us. In the past week, Trump hasn't just claimed that Harris's crowd sizes are fake, but that the polls, the ones that show Harris ahead, Trump claims those are fake too. By suggesting that all the Harris support is fake, Trump's creating the expectation that his victory in November is a given and that the only way he can lose is if the election is stolen from him. If that sounds familiar, that's because it is exactly what Trump did in the lead up to the 2020 election. Trump didn't just start saying that the election was rigged in November. He laid the groundwork for that big lie months earlier. Here he is in August and September of 2020.
The only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that. It's the only way we're going to lose this election.
The only way they can take this election away from us is if this is a rigged election.
Democrats are trying to rig this election because it's the only way they're going to win. The only way they're going to win is to rig it.
The only way they're going to win it is to rig it. Now go back to Senator Sanders' statement for a second. If you can convince your supporters that thousands of people who attended a televised rally do not exist, it will not be hard to convince them that the election returns in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and elsewhere are fake and fraudulent. This is what destroying faith in institutions is about. This is what undermining democracy is about. This is what fascism is about. And Trump's campaign to delegitimize a Democratic victory extends to the candidate herself. Because President Biden dropped out and Vice President Harris took the top of the ticket, Harris's candidacy now is somehow, in Trump's twisted logic, it is unconstitutional.
The presidency was taken away from Joe Biden, and I'm no Biden fan, but I'll tell you what, from a constitutional standpoint, from any standpoint you look at, they took the presidency away. The fact that you can get no votes, lose in the primary system, in other words, you had 14 or 15 people, she was the first one out, and that you can then be picked to run for president, seems to me actually unconstitutional. Perhaps it's not.
For the record, it is perfectly constitutional for Kamala Harris to be the Democratic candidate for president. But the facts clearly are not the point here. This campaign, much like Trump's birther campaign against Barack Obama, is to undermine the candidate in the eyes of the voter and to preemptively render their presidency illegitimate. It is about destroying an institution and undermining democracy. And man, it sort of seems to be working, at least among Trump supporters. Polling from Pew Research Center last month shows that just 47% of Republicans think this upcoming election will be conducted fairly. For contrast, that is compared to 77% of Democrats. Now, you might think that a candidate who needs his supporters to turn out for the election would want them to believe that elections are fair and worth actually voting in. But the worse Trump does in the polls, the bigger the crowd sizes and the bigger the volunteer armies for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, the more you are going to hear this kind of stuff coming from Trump. Crying fraud is once again his backup plan if he loses the election. And I am not just speculating here. This is the co-chair of Trump's campaign, Chris LaCivita, speaking with Politico last month about their strategy for this election.
I mean, it's not over until he puts his hand on the Bible and takes the oath. It's not over till then. It's not over on Election Day. It's over on Inauguration Day. Because I wouldn't put anything past anybody.
What do you mean?
I just don't. I don't put anything past.
You think Democrats are the course?
Look, there is a well-documented report that talks about all of the efforts that the Democrats had in place in 2020 despite everything that had happened, that there was a well-documented about ways to prevent if Donald Trump had, quote unquote, won. So we, like I said, we plan for every worst case scenario. That way we're ready for it.
And we begin tonight with evangelicals, a group that, in a surprising twist, is mobilizing support for the Kamala Harris presidential campaign. One group, Evangelical Christians for Kamala Harris, released a new ad highlighting that time Donald Trump told the Family Leadership Summit in Iowa that he does not ask God for forgiveness.
Have you ever asked God for forgiveness? That's a tough question. I'm not sure I have. I don't bring God into that picture. I don't.
Evangelical Christians for Kamala Harris was not on anyone's bingo card for 2024 because most people assume evangelical is synonymous with conservative. It's not. There are plenty of evangelicals who reject the mean, selfish version of the religion that follows Jesus the Christ. We call them red letter Christians. Think Bishop William Barber, friend of this show, who is, wait for it, an evangelical Christian. Think of the Christian pastors who led the civil rights movement. Think Rev Sharpton. Not all Christians are the evangelical white dudes with main character energy from The Handmaid's Tale. But this most surprising election does keep delivering surprises. Even some white evangelical Protestants are fed up with Trump. That is a group that gave him 84% of their national vote in 2020. They're not alone in tiring of his act. A separate group, Christians for Kamala, had a Zoom meeting last night that included leaders from several progressive Christian groups, urging supporters to get behind Harris and Walz. Call it divine intervention? Or perhaps lots of Christians are just getting fed up with being associated with the hateful vision of Donald Trump, his Bible stunts and religious hypocrisy, and are fighting back with a counter-narrative to conservative evangelicals' overwhelming support for Trump. These groups say the conversation on faith and spirituality has been hijacked by the Christian right. And the list continues. The groups that have been hijacked by MAGA who want their identities back include unions, including the United Auto Workers, which is launching a nationwide effort to mobilize its 1 million active and retired workers to vote for VP Harris. The National Black Caucus of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Union also endorsed Vice President Harris for the presidency. As the union's national president, Union President Sean O'Brien, who spoke at the Republican National Convention last month, is now himself slamming Trump for his anti-labor comments during his bro fest with Elon Musk. lots of Republicans are also fed up with the magnification of their party, which is why Republicans for Harris online rally was attended virtually by 73,000 people, according to organizers, and where former elected Republican officials and party leaders like former Republican Congressman and January 6th Commission member Adam Kinzinger made the case for supporting the Democratic ticket. Are we in the Twilight Zone, but like the really happy, non-creepy kind? Or maybe there's nothing strange about the fact that the Harris-Walz ticket is a movement beyond just voting against Trump. It's a movement to vote for something, to vote for a change, a ticket with zero Ivy Leaguers, no one born with a silver spoon, but instead regular Americans who worked regular jobs, like Harris working her way through college with a job at McDonald's, or Walz being a teacher and football coach with no stocks and bonds in his portfolio. Folks who know what it's like to be middle class and build your life, not just inherit it. These aren't people backed mainly by billionaires and whose sole policy idea is to cut taxes even further for the super rich and corporations. And Americans are starting to really appreciate that. Harris is leading or tied with Trump in 6 of 7 key swing states, per a Wednesday report from the nonpartisan Cook Political Report. And they will roll through Pennsylvania on a bus tour on Sunday, dropping in on the crucial battleground state just days before the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Speaking of the Keystone State, a new Quinnipiac poll of Pennsylvania finds Harris leading Trump by 3 points among likely voters in a head-to-head matchup. Blue-collar voters, the battlegrounds, Christians, unions, and even Republicans are part of the incredible momentum that we're seeing right now. These people want their brands back. They're not all MAGA. And I think they want their country back, too. Joining me now is Olivia Troy, member of Republicans for Harris and former senior advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, MSNBC political analyst and former Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri, and the Reverend Al Sharpton, the aforementioned Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation on MSNBC. I'm going to come to the folks that are remote in just a moment, but I do want to start here at the table. I was really struck by what the former lieutenant governor of Georgia had to say. I don't know if we have that soundbite of him, really just like talking about like, what do we want our kids to remember us for? You were on that call yesterday. What was it like being on a call full of Republicans, but who are supporting a Democrat?
It was amazing. I'll be honest. I mean, it was such a privilege. I moderated the conversation. And it was so powerful, and I would say something that gave me hope for the first time in a long time about the Republican Party's future was the responses that were happening in the chat as this call was happening. Just hearing from Republicans across the country, one of them who said, I have voted Republican my entire life. I've been voting Republican since Reagan, and I am going to vote for Kamala now. And I mean, I think to me, I think what people see in Kamala Harris is traditional values that we all look to, right? I mean, it's traditional values for America. It's the values of, protecting our individual freedoms, standing strong as America for America's democracy, standing strong with our allies internationally. I think those traditionally in the past, Joy, were, I would say, conservative.
Republicans ran on.
Yes, back in the day.
Yeah.
I mean, it was incredible. And the stories and the conversations and the speeches that people gave, I think we're very personal. Like Rosario Marin, she served in the George W. Bush administration. She was the 41st U.S. Treasurer of the United States. And she spoke about what it was like, she's a Mexican-American, and what it's like to see all these ugly narratives about immigrants and minorities in the country that she sees in the Republican Party today, and how that's not the party that she identifies with.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, what's interesting about it is, my buddy Michael Steele, he says this all the time, and I ask him, why are you still in the Republican Party? Like, why did you? And he always says, I'm not leaving, they should leave. Because, there has been this sort of metastasis inside of the Republican Party that has eaten it up and turned it into Donald Trump. Donald Trump used to be a Democrat. Like, way back in the day, he wasn't even a Republican. He didn't like Ronald Reagan very much. And he's sort of eaten the party alive. And people who, we've talked about this offline, who they don't even like the guy. Republicans on Capitol Hill, but they've let him eat the party. And it is fascinating to watch people. They're not calling themselves ex-Republicans. You guys weren't ex-Republicans. You are the core of the party saying we want our party back.
Yeah, and to me, I think that's what's amazing about our country. This is an organic grassroots movement that's growing. right? Well, I would say that Republican leadership has failed us as a party because they continue to pander and fall back in line with Trump and enable him. The worst of the worst, instincts of his in this party. And it's so damaging to the Republican brand. But you're seeing now a movement that is saying enough. And if you're not going to take a stand, we are. And we're going to back a candidate that we believe in and support. And, we'll see what the future holds for the GOP.
The country needs two healthy political parties, and it would be nice to have a normal Republican Party. We can just argue about tax rates and stuff like normal. Rev, I want to get you in on this, too, because I had to say the thing about, people think people don't understand what an evangelical Christian is. Again, lots of Christian pastors who a lot of Democrats who watch this network and liberals are evangelicals. I would consider you Kojic, brother. You're an evangelical. So it's like people have decided evangelical equals hateful, mean, and hate immigrants. No, evangelicals actually love immigrants. They actually believe in Jesus's red letters where he said you have to support the immigrant, the aged, the widow, the orphan. That is also evangelicalism. What do you make of Christians now standing up proudly and saying, we want the kinder candidates?
Well, I think when you look at the fact that evangelicals live by Jesus talking about the Good Samaritan who stopped and helped somebody of a different race and a different situation and helped him. How do you preach the Good Samaritan and then call people that are migrant out of their name, or say that people that are leading anti-Semitic marches in Charlottesville are people that are good people on both sides? So it's really incongruous to preach one thing on Sunday and then advocate politically divisiveness and other than me, I'm going to be against on Monday. You have to be consistent. And I've talked to many people that I know who are evangelicals. I grew up a Pentecostal and then a Baptist. And I've talked to people that are totally to what I would call the right in terms of interpreting theology, who has said, but I can't put this in my religious beliefs. I can't advocate somebody so divisive.
Yeah, and, Claire, the other piece of it is the working class. It is this interesting thing now, right, where the two Ivy Leaguers are on the Republican ticket, and the ones who want to cut taxes for the super rich are on that side, and the working class folks who worked at McDonald's and as a teacher. Donald Trump recently came out with a quote saying neither of them have ever had a real job. Is he, on something? A teacher is a real job. I hate to break it to Trump. They didn't inherit $317 million from their dada and then take over his company. Trump Organization is Trump's company. I mean, it's Trump's dad's company. But look at what's happening among working class voters. So among non-college educated voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, according to the New York Times CNN poll, the margin that Trump had over Biden was 26 points. The margin he has over Harris among white non-college voters has dropped to only 13. He's still ahead, but it's shrinking, Claire.
Yeah, it's always been a head scratcher to me that a guy that is really into ugly gilded toilets and shows of, really bizarre, tacky wealth, and someone who has never gotten their fingernails dirty. I, like Kamala, I worked my way through law. My parents couldn't afford to send me to law school. I worked as a server in restaurants and all through college and law school to make things work. Donald Trump's never done that. Donald Trump he's never, ever worried about how he was going to pay the bills, except he obviously didn't have any problem with screwing over working people by not paying his contractors. That's the other thing.
The gremlins have gotten Claire. But, I think what she was saying is, and it is absolutely true, Rev, you know this very well, is that Donald Trump was known for screwing over people who were working class, meaning workers that worked for him, contractors, subcontractors that helped him build his buildings, and then he would refuse to pay them and say, well, sue me, I'm not paying you.
Just 3 days after Ohio's 6-week abortion ban went into effect, an Indiana OBGYN got a wrenching call. A 10-year-old girl in Ohio had been raped. She was 6 weeks and 3 days pregnant. For helping that girl, Dr. Caitlin Bernard was hounded by right-wing media. She was investigated, her employer sued by the Republican Attorney General of Indiana. That suit was finally dropped just this week. And Dr. Caitlin Bernard joins me now. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I know that you were not a party to the suit that was finally dropped this week. It was against IU Healthcare. But given that that appears to be the final chapter in this kind of crusade to punish you or your employer, how do you feel about that seeming to come to a close?
What I can say is that it speaks for itself that a federal judge dismissed the case on its merits, and I appreciate IU Health for always supporting me. Most importantly, I'm happy to be able to take care of my patients. That's what I have always wanted, and that's what I uphold every day. But I think it's very concerning, and people should really be worried about a political climate in which physicians are being harassed and intimidated for providing safe access to health care for some of our most vulnerable people.
Yeah, there was something, I think that there's an understandable impulse to not want to believe that there's a 10-year-old girl who is pregnant because of sexual assault. I think I understand that impulse viscerally. But to me, it revealed something about the world that the anti-abortion right has wrought, because this does happen. And I wonder what you think about it now, 2 years into this.
I think it is unfortunate that we are seeing what the consequences are every single day. We experience that as physicians, and now, unfortunately, it's laid bare for the rest of the country to see as well. The stories are coming out every single day, and unfortunately, they're really just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other people, survivors of sexual assault and incredibly traumatic situations of pregnancy that nobody can imagine until you're in it. And now we see what happens when abortion bans are the law of the land for so many places.
That point, I think, I just want to stay with for a moment, because ultimately you were fined and reprimanded for talking to the press about it. But the point about the tip of the iceberg, there are occasional stories, in this country of 330 million people, with 160 million women and girls, or 165 million, of truly horrific incidents. A 10-year-old who's pregnant, being forced to, get to the point of bleeding in a parking lot before you get medical care, things like that. To me, the crusade here was about punishing you for the story becoming public, precisely because it is so intimate, these details, that we're not hearing the vast majority of the worst stories because it is so painful to come forward.
That's exactly right. And I think part of the campaign, part of what upholds abortion bans is a silence. And that is exactly what they're trying to do, not just to me, but also to other physicians and even people who are in need of that care, are seeking abortions. And until we are able to speak out, whether that's in the media or through our vote, that silence will continue.
What is the status in the state of Indiana? We're showing right now that there is a ban in your state. It's not surprising. It's a conservative state. It has a Republican legislature and governor. What is the status of abortion care and health care for women and girls in the state of Indiana where you practice?
We have a very strict abortion ban with very few exceptions. The vast majority of people can't receive care in the state in which they live at home. They're forced to travel. And so are physicians. We travel primarily to Illinois to provide care for the thousands of patients who have to leave their home now every single year. And again, that's really just the people who are able to get out, to get the money together, the travel, et cetera, to be able to reach that care. And so we're seeing, a huge increase in high-risk pregnancies and the aftermath of not being able to seek safe, legal abortion care the way that they should be able to.
Final question for you. I've seen reports about what this has done to the supply of OBGYNs in states, which is folks not wanting to practice, not wanting to go to medical school in some of these states, and that having huge ripple effects for all kinds of OBGYN care, whatever kind of care it is that women and girls might need. I'm curious if you've seen that in Indiana.
Oh, absolutely. We're trying our best to train our medical students and our residents to be able to provide this emergency care. But every single day we see the consequences of patients who aren't able to receive that care, whether their physicians haven't been trained enough or whether they have no physicians. We have a huge maternity deserts in Indiana. We're seeing increase in, very complicated cases, as well as death due to lack of access to OBGYN care, and that's true not just for Indiana, but for many states around the country.
Celebrities backing Democrats over Republicans is nothing new in the world of politics. This election season gave us the clearest example of this, perhaps ever. With the change to the Democratic ticket, Vice President Harris officially got the go-ahead from none other than the Queen herself, Beyonce, to use the song Freedom from her 2016 album Lemonade during the campaign season. Back in January of 2021, a few days before Joe Biden's inauguration, his campaign held a We the People concert that included will.i.am, Ben Harper, Fall Out Boy, and Cher, just to name a few. Barack Obama had the Queen of Soul herself, Aretha Franklin, performing at his inauguration in 2009. So there's a pattern here, right? But the way musicians are rejecting Donald Trump is like deeper than any diss track I have ever heard. This is a long list of musicians who have told Donald Trump to stop playing their music. And it includes some of the biggest names: Rihanna, R.E.M., Adele, Queen, Elton John, plus the families of artists we have lost, like Prince and Tom Petty. The list keeps growing. After Trump used a music video of her song, My Heart Will Go On, at his Montana rally on Saturday, Celine Dion denounced it on social media, saying, "In no way is this use authorized, and Celine Dion does not endorse this or any similar use." She also pointed out it was quite a choice to use a song tied to the most famous sunken ship in history to talk about your campaign, adding, "And really? That song?" This week, the family of soul legend Isaac Hayes threatened to sue Trump for using the soul classic Hold On, I'm Coming, which Isaac Hayes wrote. The list of artists loudly backing Trump is, on the other hand, much shorter and includes artists like Ted Nugent and Kid Rock. But the ones who are more low-key about it seem to keep Trump at arm's length. After the assassination attempt against Trump last month, 50 Cent invoked him at a Boston concert. And immediately after, TMZ reported, reports surfaced declaring 50 would be on stage in Milwaukee to play a gig during the Republican convention. But that was news to his camp, and they quickly denied it. Joining us now to discuss is the host of The ReidOut here on MSNBC, my friend Joy Reid. Joy, thank you so much for joining us this evening on The Last Word. I'm going to start with this because this is fascinating to me. We have artists who want to sort of associate themselves with Donald Trump, but they don't really want him to play their songs. 50 talks about him. Waka Flocka Flame talks about him. Sexy Red talks about him. What is it, Joy, that you think is going on that you have entertainers who want to be near him, but they don't really want their brand completely associated with him?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that even people who, for whatever reason, and I couldn't explain to you why some of these artists want to be associated with Donald, or, like him at all, or want to reference him or sort of promote him to their fans. But know that they also are conscious of the fact that he is an anathema to the culture and to the people who buy their records, right? They may be MAGA because they want tax cuts or for whatever reason, but I think they're reading properly, and maybe their publicists are on their behalf reading properly where Donald Trump stands culturally in this country. He stands at the fringes. He stands with people like Kid Rock, who is so far out of date. He's a fringe part of the culture from like the early 90s. So Donald Trump just does not have a place in the popular culture as much as he would love to.
I want to play you some sound from one of the most famous instances of a Republican trying to latch on to popular music. This is from Reagan. And get your response on the other side.
America's future rests in 1,000 dreams inside your hearts. It rests in the message of hope in songs of a man so many young Americans admire, New Jersey's own Bruce Springsteen. And helping you make those dreams come true is what this job of mine is all about.
In that case, I think what's also telling is Bruce Springsteen was speaking about a culture of people who have been left behind. Reagan claimed they'd be speaking for a culture of people that was left behind, and yet he still didn't want it. Why do you think that was the case even back then?
Well, I mean, Bruce Springsteen is very much a Democrat, right? And he is, you know, literally campaigned for Democratic candidates when I was doing politics. He was very much present, you know, around the Obama campaign. So I think his personal politics have always been about the little guy. And he's understood Republicans and Ronald Reagan in particular, remember trickle-down economics, to be really in favor of the super rich. But look, the reality is the presidency, I've said this before, I'll say it again, the presidency is in many ways an avatar for the American people. It's sort of who we are projecting ourselves to the world as who we want to be, how we want to be seen. And so it's not surprising that presidents want to associate themselves with the popular culture, especially in the modern era. But remember, James Brown liked Ronald Reagan. You know, you've had presidents court Elvis Presley. They want to wrap their arms around the culture because they are, in many ways, an ambassador to the world for what America is. The problem for Donald Trump is that there are a lot of people who are looking at what he is and what he represents and saying, I don't want that not only associated with me, with my family, with my children. Right. I don't want to explain that to a kid. But I don't want that to be my avatar. When I interviewed Isaac Hayes III, he was very clear. This is not just about unfair use and having to compensate him for using his father's song. What bothered him is the way that Donald Trump represents himself in the world, the hatefulness, the cruelty, the meanness, the name calling. He doesn't want that associated with Isaac Hayes. He doesn't want that associated with the legacy of a great musician. And so Donald Trump's problem is that he has created a brand that is so hateful and angry at the culture. What Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are angry about is the multicultural ecumenism of what they call the left, but that just means the culture. It's a culture in which people of different races, people of different gender identities, all kind of are an amalgam and are all part of the culture of cool. And they hate that culture. So they can't turn around and say, I want Adele's music. She's like, no. The Beatles folks are like, no. Bruce Springsteen, no. Celine Dion, no. Even Eddie Grant, Earth, Wind and Fire, Everlast. You go through it. Guns N' Roses said no. Nickelback said no. Leonard Cohen said no. Linkin Park. Why they would think they could play these people's music at a concert that's celebrating going back to the 1950s literally makes no sense. Or not at a concert, at a rally. At a rally, at an events that are celebrating going backwards to before these artists literally were considered even acceptable to a lot of parents.
And it's amazing to me. I'm old enough to remember when, like, Brian McKnight, you know, performed at a Republican convention and he survived, but people don't even want to be associated with that now. I want to read you also this quote. This is really fascinating. It's from The Hill, and they reported in June about Donald Trump meeting with House Republicans. And one of the things he said is that Trump was surprised. He was surprised that Taylor Swift didn't want to come out and endorse him because in his mind, he had passed policies that were going to be helpful. What does it say about the bubble that Trump world and Republicans are in that they would even think that? Because I think it's one part to realize that you're not cool enough to get into the building, but it's something else to not realize how despised you are by the people who are dancing inside the club.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a part of the Republican Party and the conservative movement that is like the angry person that can't sit at the cool table. And so they hate everyone at the cool table because they're not sitting there. I think, but, you know, it is, there's something a little bit sad about it, right? I mean, the fact that Donald Trump would have to get rejected by Prince and Queen, two artists who there's nothing about the MAGA movement that would even be welcoming to the individuals who are Prince and the members of Queen. But the fact that they so desperately want to be at that cool table, that they want that culture of cool connection, and they want to be in the door and inside of the club, it does say something about why they hate American culture so much and why they're so against it, because they know that their old-fashioned 1950s send the women back to the kitchen values just don't fit in with that culture.
They desperately want to be in the club, but 50 won't let them use that song. Joy Reid, thank you so much for joining us tonight on The Last Word.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend.
Many Republicans are desperately trying to get Donald Trump to focus on substance as he goes after his new opponent, VP Kamala Harris. That includes some down-ballot Republicans who are getting nervous about Trump being at the top of the ticket. They want him to focus on things like the border and the economy, not crowd sizes or Kamala Harris's race. Joining me now to discuss, Maria Teresa Camara, the president and CEO of Voto Latino. She's an MSNBC contributor, and former Republican Congressman David Jolly of Florida. David, you know some of these down-ballot Republicans because you yourself have been a down-ballot Republican at one time or another. What do you think about how they're feeling tonight about their leader?
Steph, the last time I was a down-ballot Republican, I was on the ballot with Donald Trump in 2016. Let me tell you how hard this is. But here is the problem. It's not just Donald Trump completely incapable of articulating an agenda or continuing to be listless, and just transactionally in the agenda. But down-ballot Republicans really don't have an agenda either. This is also a cycle where House Republicans have nothing to take to the American people on virtually every piece of legislation of national consequence, from raising the debt ceiling to keeping the government open, to funding to stop Vladimir Putin's march across Europe. It was a majority of Democratic votes in the House, not Republicans, that actually led the governing coalition in Washington. So as much as these down-ballot Republicans are rightly suffering under Donald Trump's listless campaign, truly one of the worst presidential campaigns we've now seen in modern history, House Republicans have nobody to blame but themselves because they don't have a discernible agenda either.
All right, Maria. Well, in terms of Republicans staying on message and focusing, let's talk about another Republican, J.D. Vance. Tonight, he made an appearance on Fox News, and I want to share just a portion of his comments. Watch this.
Senator, one of my dear friends tonight said to me, well, all these suburban women, all they care about is abortion, and they don't understand that decision is with the states now. It's not banned nationally, even if some people want it to be banned nationally. It's with the states. What do you say to suburban women out there who are marinating in this propaganda?
Well, first of all, I don't buy that, Laura. I think most suburban women care about the normal things that most Americans care about.
The normal things. So Vance's opponent, Governor Tim Walz, responded on X, where he said it's pretty normal to respect a woman's right to make her own damn health care decisions. So my question to you, Maria, do Republicans want their VP candidate out there saying it is not normal to care about reproductive rights?
Well, Stephanie, they don't want to talk about reproductive rights, period. The Republican Party knows that this is something that they lose. The reason there was no red wave during the 2022 midterms was because there were plenty of independent Republican fathers saying, wait a second, I do not feel comfortable that my daughter won't have the same choices as my mother or my wife. That's why there was no red wave. They don't want J.D. Vance talking about abortion at all. But at the same time, he doesn't know what to talk about because they don't have a record to show on how they're going to improve the lives of the American people. And when Laura Ingraham goes on air and says that we have not taken the rights away, that it all resides on states, on the decision of states, talk to women of Texas, where that state has banned abortion care and women are literally dying and bleeding to death because they're trying to give birth and they just don't have a second shot. Have those conversations with those parents and those children whose mothers are not coming back. It's unjust, it's cruel, and at the end of the day, they're fabricating the facts.
David, tonight, our friend Chris Hayes pointed out the very different ways that VP Harris and former President Trump are talking about kitchen table issues and the cost of living. I want you to look at this Kamala Harris ad and then this Donald Trump Fox interview. Here's a side-by-side.
She grew up in a middle-class home. She was the daughter of a working mom, and she worked at McDonald's while she got her degree. Kamala Harris knows what it's like to be middle class. It's why she's determined to lower healthcare costs and make housing more affordable.
How are you going to make the economy not just the the food and electricity, but bring down the rent prices, the housing prices, so that these kids can survive and without their parents' help.
Such a good question,
You're
Mr.
right.
President.
We are going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to bring down the cost of energy. Energy is what caused the worst inflation, I think, in the history of our country. Food prices are up 50%, sometimes more. You look at bacon. Bacon is quadrupled. You can't order bacon. You can't order anything. We're living horribly.
He's going to drill, baby, drill at a moment where we're producing more oil than we ever have in U.S. history. And we also found out today that on Friday, VP Harris is going to announce a call for the first ever federal ban on corporate price gouging. That's a big headline. We don't actually know how that would manifest, what it would look like. But what are your thoughts on this contrast? Because it was a totally fair question from that Trump supporter to Donald Trump. He teed him up.
Yeah, and look, I think what we continue to see in Donald Trump is the showman who says these platitudes with nothing behind them, very transactional. He would say something different tomorrow. And look, not to anger the pork producers, maybe we should all eat less bacon, and that could help the process as well. Those are the types of things you would hear from Donald Trump. But what you're hearing from Vice President Harris is cogent policies. And I think also the tone and the framing is so important, because this is where I think the race has really begun to gel. With Vice President Harris, you see somebody waking up every day, fighting for the country, fighting for America, understanding your issues, saying, kind of in a very Biden way, when the middle class grows, America grows, we all grow together. And with Donald Trump, you see him always reaching to beat up on the country, to beat up on who we are, to say we're not good enough, we haven't gotten there. Why are we so bad? Americans don't feel that way. There were qualms about Joe Biden's age, but what we're clearly seeing since he left is people are okay with the direction of the party or the direction of the country. And so this notion of, are we going in the right direction under Vice President Harris or not, I think is solidifying. Do we want to go back to the direction of Donald Trump? He continues to remind us why not.
Maria, what is MAGA offering working people? It actually makes sense for the super rich, for corporate America, to be motivated by tax cuts and deregulation, right? It will make them richer. It will help their businesses move with more ease. But why would everyday Americans, those who are struggling to get by, why would they care about tax cuts for the rich? What is Donald Trump offering them, the people who are actually in his base?
Right. Well, I think for a long time he was trying to say that the reason that they're in this lot is because of the immigrants flying in and taking away their jobs, right? Like that's what he was proposing, and that he was going to basically wipe out all those undocumented immigrants and their life is going to be better. But it's important for us to level. He knows that the Biden policy is so good that today he tried to claim that the $35 cap on insulin and inhalers came from him, that it was his idea. That is not true. That was solidly a Democratic initiative that was passed and signed by the Biden administration and the Harris administration. And I do think that, at least in the work that we do every day at Voto Latino, that we're seeing, Stephanie, is young people finally seeing themselves in Kamala Harris and jumping in. There's a surge in voter registration in states that we saw people kind of lackluster. We're seeing a surge in Arizona, in Georgia, and Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and young people saying, she speaks my language with authenticity. She grasps what I'm trying to do. She understands my everyday struggle, and she has the policies to prove it with the Biden-Harris administration. Donald Trump had the opportunity for 4 years to actually demonstrate what he stood for, and it's loud and clear. And it's all about him, and it's all about his big business, and has very little to do with the American people.
Here's the quote. With unnerving frequency, the contemporary Republican Party sees the recent past as an enemy to be overpowered, crushed, and conquered. It is an effort predicated on the assumption that our memories can be bullied into submission, forced to give way to manufactured stories the GOP prefers. To see such authoritarian tactics in American democracy as anything less than dangerous would be a mistake. That is from a new book out this week by my MSNBC colleague, the great Steve Bannon. It is called Ministry of Truth: Democracy, Reality, and the Republicans' War on the Recent Past. And it is essential reading because it breaks down how and why Republicans, led by Donald Trump, lie in an attempt to rewrite the recent past. Joining me now is the one and only Steve Bannon, producer for The Rachel Maddow Show and editor of the indispensable Maddow blog. Steve, it's such a treat to have you in the flesh, on the set, speaking live with me. First of all, let's just get to the sort of like the essence of the book. You write, this campaign of rewriting recent history is built on a foundation of pernicious pillars. The first is a wholesale indifference toward reality. The second is the absence of shame. The third is the role of allies. And finally, there is the importance of repetition. It's such a clear breakdown of how this is happening. I guess I wonder the motivation as you see it. Is it purely to stay in power? Do you see something broader in their goals?
A little bit of both, actually. I mean, I think clearly there is an electoral element to this. Clearly, Trump wants to regain power, and he thinks that the way to do that is to fool just enough people by rewriting recent history, hoping he can just overpower our memories into submission and convince them that he deserves a second term, despite his failures, despite his scandals, and so on. But I also think that there is a larger concern related to democracy. I think that there are a lot of Americans right now who are concerned about the rising authoritarianism in the United States. And that's a legitimate concern. I share that concern. But with that in mind, we have to not forget that as long as there have been historical records, there have been authoritarians engaging in all kinds of tactics to rewrite history, to eliminate enemies, to cover up crimes, and so on. And so it's unsettling at a minimum to see Donald Trump and his allies borrowing a page from those same playbooks.
Yeah, you use first of all, I don't know whether it's a testament to Trump's tactics and the Republican Party's tactics that I'd forgotten about how many important, like staggering examples there are of this. You talk about his, cry that he was going to rebuild the wall or build the wall and have Mexico pay for it, and the fact that he contends that the wall has been built and Mexico is paid for it. You talk about Russia and Russian interference and the denial of that reality. What stands out to you as one of the more forgotten but most sort of pernicious and useful examples to focus on?
One that came up just today, as a matter of fact. I mean, it was timely and generous to help bolster my book, I think.
You're welcome.
To see Donald Trump today making the case that his economy, the economy under his presidency, was extraordinary. It was historic. It broke all the records. Human eyes have never seen an economy like Donald Trump, except it's not true. Even if we exclude 2020 from the picture altogether, of course, when the economy hit a recession related to COVID, even if we exclude that, for the first 3 years, the numbers are not nearly as good as the last 3 years of Obama era. And so really, the last three presidents, he ranks third when it comes to economic performance. And so the idea that somehow he was this economic genius and mastermind, if only we returned him to the White House, everything would be great in the economy. It's nonsense.
Well, and what's, I think, most disturbing about that is a sentiment that it is filtered from the hardcore right-wing corners of MAGA land to the center of the American, electorate, right? Even some Democrats believe that the economy shepherded under Republicans is better than under Democrats.
Yeah, and I think that my book goes a long way in trying to set this record straight here, because really, when you look at the data, job growth actually went down in the first 3 years of Trump as compared to the last 3 years of Obama. And that is just lost to history, because the history has been rewritten by pernicious figures who believe that people shouldn't know the truth.
You make a real distinction between history, right, which is always subject to argument and relitigation, and recent past. Right. Can you talk a little bit about why it's more damaging to a democracy to try and rewrite recent past, as opposed to this sort of broader debate that we tend to have about historical events?
Right. I mean, clearly the Republican culture war is targeting all kinds of things from generations past, history before our lifetime. And that's an important element. And my heart goes out to the culture warriors who are involved in that fight. But going after recent history is so much more ambitious. Yeah. It's telling you that you don't remember things that you saw. Your lying eyes should be just discounted and discredited altogether, because you should replace those memories with the brute force rhetoric that Republicans prefer. And it's extraordinary. It takes our breath away. And it's also a classic example of gaslighting. Yeah. It's telling you that if you believe the truth, if you believe what actually happened, then somehow you're nuts.
Or you're a stooge of the liberal elite, the media, technology, whether it's AI-generated crowd sizes or whether it's Democrats rigging an election. It's the system is broken and it's rigged against you. To that end, J.D. Vance, right, a clip from 2020 has surfaced wherein J.D. Vance is talking to a podcaster about his beliefs about women and their role. And on this podcast, he explains how his mother-in-law, Usha Vance Vance's mother, left her job as a biologist to help raise their newborn son. And then the podcast host says that's the purpose of postmenopausal females. This is the clip.
It makes him a much better human being to have exposure to his grandparents.
Well, I don't know.
And the evidence on this, by the way, is like super clear.
That's the whole purpose of the postmenopausal female.
Yes. Can we play? I don't know if we can. He literally says, yes, that is the whole purpose of the postmenopausal female, says the host, Eric Weinstein. And then J.D. Vance says, yes. This is not a good data point for J.D. Vance. The Vance campaign is, their response to it is, Steve, the media is dishonestly putting words in J.D.'s mouth. Of course, he does not agree with what the host said.
Well, you know, one of the lines I use in the book a lot is that Republicans want us to discard our lying eyes. Discard your lying eyes.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, we're supposed to discard our lying ears, too. I mean, because the tape isn't lying here. We heard him say yes. We heard this ridiculous and offensive and insulting comment, which normal, healthy people would say, no, I don't believe that. I completely reject that. And yet here we are.
You know, it's not good news for J.D. Vance, but it's especially not good news for a functioning democracy and institutions that need to retain their integrity. Because the more you vilify the media and the general mainstream ecosystem, the less you have a set of shared facts. The less we are all operating in the same reality, the harder it becomes to govern fairly. Steve Bannon, here's the book right here. I'm holding it up. Thank you again for being here. I love seeing you in person. The book is titled Ministry of Truth, Democracy, Reality, and the Republicans' War on the Recent Past. And it is on sale now, and you should buy many copies of it.